together all your experiences in relation to the entire university ecosystem in Nigeria?
Oh, thank you very much, Prof. Wonderful question. I think the first thing to say is that in all things that we do as humans, the place of providence is very, very important. And if you like, the importance of God in our life cannot be underestimated. God is the ultimate decider, try as we may. But again, once that is continuance, what is next is the efforts that man invests in his endeavor, and of course, the purpose, the pattern, or the direction, the trajectory that man sets for him or herself. I think when you and I were in the UK at different times, and we also followed the same trajectory, we returned home despite the temptation to stay behind. But returning home, there were quite some misgivings, a lot of anxieties over why you have to get a degree in a Western society and you now choose to come back home. It just tells us that you can find whatever you want in every environment that you find yourself, irrespective of the prevailing circumstances, however unfavorable those circumstances may be. You can still manage to squeeze water out of stone, irrespective of how almost illogical that is. If there's a purpose, if there's a vision, and of course, if God is on your side. And I need to also quickly add that, Prof, I think I try largely to manage my expectations. In managing my expectations, what I do mean is that I am not overly maybe overly ambitious. I just chose from what one of my mentors told me a long time ago, that identify your own little corner, and try to see if you can make the best out of, be the best or be one of the best in the corner that you're identifying. Even if you cannot be the best, just ensure that you place yourself within that ecosystem. And you can narrow it down to the Nigerian education system and the business of information and knowledge gathering and sharing. And of course, if you want to be more specific, the tertiary education system. We have challenges, but you can still be the best you can be within that disturbing challenges, as the case could be, Prof.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me just bring this and tie this to what you said now. As you are aware, in most of the Western countries now, the issue of higher education, especially university education, is undergoing rapid changes. People are talking about reimagining higher education. People are talking on how to bridge the gap between the gown and the town. And in fact, it's becoming even more challenging in these days of AI, where students can come in with AI assistant, people like you who write exceptionally well as journalists. AI prompt of 2 minutes, they write better than you. So people now are saying in the UK, for example, many big companies, they don't really bother about your degrees anymore. They hire you, train you for like 6 months, 7 months, and let you go. So that starts to answer the question, where do you see university education? I'm sure you are aware when you travel around, especially to the UK, the big bank offices. The last time I was there, I was trying to find an office for Barclays. That used to be in every street corner. It took me, I had to take train to some places to find just a branch of Barclays Bank. And people are saying that this is likely to happen in the education system. That already now you have some, there was a company that was providing services to legal profession. It shut down recently because AI suddenly emerged to do the job better. So where do you see higher education, before I come down to this, in the next 10, 15 years in Nigeria? How will you imagine higher education would be?
Okay, Prof, I think the immediate response I can give to your question, which is actually well put, is that, the place of higher education will continue to remain, just that it's going to be redefined, like you said. And if you look quickly into history, all discoveries, all scientific discoveries that have come, from maybe the 19th century up to the time that we are talking now, have always come with a lot of circumspection, some level of suspicion. And of course, man is often wont to doubt some of these things. But of course, eventually, when we now integrate it perfectly into our lives, into our system, they will just find that those inventions have actually come to assist us to mitigate existence and to maybe smoothing interactions and productivity, as the case could be, better than it used to be prior to the invention, as the case could be. And, you know, if you look at the kind of education that we get, even before AI came, for instance,
Yeah.
the internet itself has actually liberalized the manner in which knowledge is shared, in which information is shared, such that information has become really commonplace. Information that we used to find it very difficult to access before became really a commonplace. Then, of course, AI now came and made it more sophisticated. But we have to make a difference between systemic structured learning and the one that is uncoordinated and haphazard. We have to make a distinction between the one that is responsible and the one where there are chances of irresponsibility. The one that is ethical and the one where there are chances of high levels of unethical practices. And that's where education, structured education, systematic, methodical education comes into place. That's where universities will continue to come in. That's where tertiary education system will continue to come in. Even the big tech companies that we keep talking about, yes, they probably take graduates, they retrain them. That's fine. I mean, it's about house style, like we say in journalism. It's about organizational style. You know, you have to get people onboarded into your kind of system, your patterns and your particularities. These things are acceptable, but it's not going to displace the place of the primary first level kind of education that individuals get at the level of the universities. So the universities will continue, tertiary education system will continue to be a foundation from where individuals can proceed into the larger society and launch themselves, fitting themselves into the different patterns, the different particularities that individual companies and organizations might maybe want them to come into, as the case could be. So I do not see AI, you know, or the technologies that will still continue anyway. AI invention is not the final one. There are other levels of sophistication that we're still going to get into. What they are going to help us do is only to largely increase productivity, provided that there's responsible, ethical usage, you know, because you cannot do away with these technologies. And at the same time, these technologies too cannot do away, you know, with the human elements, you know, in the sustenance, you know, of and the stability of systems and societies, as the case could be, Prof.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I was looking at or thinking about the content of education. For example, it's not, as you rightly pointed out, it's not only AI that is the challenge, but let's just focus now on just AI and the challenge academics face globally now, especially in the developing countries. While many universities are grappling on how to, with plagiarism software came out, Grammarly, Ponitin, and the rest of all, that helped to, help to make sure that students are not overcopying, bringing in the internet aspect that you've talked about. But now you have, say, like AI, that's while the university systems are grappling on how to make sure that students do not rely on AI assistants to do most work. You also have companies like Thesis AI that's promising students that, look, if you use our own system, nobody can catch you. I mean, you can. That's so it becomes that's one thing. And then if you see it in isolation, it's a different thing. But seeing it in the context of the town gown dichotomy, the relevance of your education to what the industry needs. And the industry is rapidly evolving. And people are now talking about that the kind of education you get now may not actually properly prepare you for industry experience. So now this gap, town gown dichotomy, is becoming more challenging in the age of AI. So that's what's one of the things I would like you to look at the curriculum, and if you can tie it to this question, what will be your vision? What do you plan to do? In base, what will you want to be seen as your footprints? I say this given the fact that I know you know about the World University Ranking, which many people becoming increasingly popular. The two most popular ones are the Time Higher Education and the QS ranking. In the time 2026 Time Higher Education ranking, 24 universities from Nigeria made the ranking, and Base was not there. And in fact, ranking of some institutions, you see, as popular as Bayes and Nile and American University, Yola are, they've not been able to make into the ranking. Public institutions have been very criticized. I'm sorry, I'm loading three questions in one. Have been very much criticized. But if you look at the ranking, say like at the time higher education, number one ranked in Nigeria, none of them is within the highest rank is University of Ibadan, University of Lagos, which together only came in the bracket of 801 to 1,000 bracket. Others are in the category of 1,200, 1,500. And they are public institutions, apart from the Covenant University, which was number one in Nigeria last year and number three this year. And then you have Babcock, you have uh, mostly state university, landmark university. Why is Base not in this ranking? And what will you do as the new vice chancellor, who is also very passionate about research, to make sure that Base comes up in this ranking? And this is often a question of research and research output.
All right, thank you very much, Prof. Then first on the question on AI that you continued with, I think it's a matter of us adopting and adapting to inventions that are upcoming. Inventions come in sophistication, and of course, society is also dynamic. With this level, with the sophistication that it comes up with, the level of manipulation will also increase or get heightened. And even in the criminal realm, in criminology, we get told many times that crime gets dynamic, for instance, and that criminals will always respond in a certain way when the law enforcement agencies are on their heels. When they are catching up with them, they try to become more sophisticated. So it's a thinking process that will continue. And what is the point I'm trying to make? I'm just trying to say that because we know that the benefits of these inventions are much better than the downsides, the onus will continue to be on humanity and on the thinking populace, the intelligentsia, to also keep devising ways of minimizing the danger that comes with it, including the ability of manipulators, mischief makers, closet nymphomaniacs, closet psychopaths, profiteers, and people who just want to make us imagine the inadequacies inherent in these organizations and in these innovations. If you look at our university, for instance, oftentimes we know that our students hardly want to read. They just want to get certificate largely world over, not just in Nigeria, but and also only in Africa. But I remember in UK at the time the debate was around dumping down. People just want to get the certificate and move on. But the onus is also on us to strengthen the mechanism around which we detect, plagiarized copies that are not original, so that we'll help them to. Sometimes we know these fellows need help more than more than they are aware that they need help. And that's why eventually, in the first instance, it was around, the use of Turnitin, but AI now came. Turnitin had to modify and to be able to detect, AI-generated copies. And eventually now we are aware of applications that try to also manipulate Turnitin detectors or any kind of credit referencing check at all, so that they will not detect copies that have been, that are not original, as the case could be. So it's a continuing process, a continuing tangle that we may not be able to predict how it's going to end. But I'm very confident and very optimistic that the positive far outweigh the negative. Much as innovations will continue, the challenge will also be on the innovators to continuously devise ways of minimizing the risk inherent in it. And of course, the onus is also on us, as operators in the education sector, to preach responsible, ethical use of the innovations, such that it will not be a disadvantage to humanity. And if you look at history as well, I hardly can find any innovation that has completely been a disadvantage, even though the downsides, have been applied, by inordinate, poor thinking people to harm humanity. It is what it is, but we shall overcome. Now, on the question of ranking, Prof, yes, ranking can be a signal, can be somewhat symbolic, and it's often very nice, for institutions to work towards meeting, the indices or the criteria that ranking organizations use. And what are these indices? Sometimes employment quality, destination, the places where they are going to work, research output, and all such things. These are very good salutary criteria that have been brought out by the ranking organizations. But again, we also know there could be limitations with them. And that's why sometimes you may people have expressed surprise at how some universities have been poorly or wrongly rated, irrespective of their feats. I remember at the time there was a university in Switzerland or somewhere in the Nordic Scandinavian country that said they were no longer interested in the ranking. They were not going to participate because the projections or the outputs are questionable. But it does not limit the credibility of these, ranking system. Yeah, I'm not saying that it limits it, but I'm just saying that there are some inadequacies that we may not be able to deny. Well, again, to the specifics of Baze University. With the specifics of Baze University, I think efforts are on. Baze University is funded by somebody who is, is a very, for me, I think I see him as a very good visionary, a very good missioner, somebody with clear-cut cardinal objectives, and of course, in my 13 years in the place, he has never joked with quality, with excellence, and with even perfection, as the case could be, even though we know no human being can be perfect. All you need to do, all we do really managing the place, is to tell him what we need to do to achieve excellence. And he often stops at nothing to make sure that suggestion is implemented. And we do know that research is key. The university is not a place of fun. The university is a place for knowledge production, knowledge sharing, and of course, it can also be a place for innovation. In our own kind of political economy, we even need it more. We need this more. So I think that what I hope to do by the grace of God, after the privilege of being appointed as Vice Chancellor, is to just focus to work from the prism of the objectives of the owner, the Board of Trustees, which I do know it's consistent with the ideal university system. Oftentimes when we make projections, we are very respectful of our local Nigerian African institutions. We are very, very respectful of them. But at the same time, we often like to benchmark the occurrences, the happenings in highly rated universities like Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge. We look at them as models, and of course, we may not get to where they are just by the stroke of the pen or overnight, but we just use them as benchmark, as the ideal institutions to model our operations after. And that's what we have been, that's what he has been doing. And that's what he has been able to galvanize the rest of us to continue to do. And I don't think I'm going to deviate from that direction, considering that to the glory of God, I've also been somebody who likes perfection, even though I know it's not attainable. But the good thing is to be as close as possible to perfection, as the case could be, Prof.
Okay, Prof, I know your time is very limited now. I'll just ask one more question, and then I think there are one or two from the people who have sent questions in the chat. I'll ask Cecilia to take only two, because I know you wanted it to last for only 30 minutes. And first of all is that one of the criticisms of private universities is that they are too much lecture-oriented, reminiscent of the root system of learning. in our own higher academic institution. Let me give you an example as a publisher. One of the reasons South African universities dominate the global ranking is the system of funding. In South Africa, every year, with what they call DOHE, Department of Higher Education and Training, publishes a list of journals that are accredited. Each journal that is each scholar that publishes in that journal, the institution gets 1,500 rands, roughly 600, roughly 600 pounds, 6,000 pounds. Sorry, gets 5,000 rands, roughly 6,000 pounds, which is shared between the institution and a small portion going to the researcher. In Nigeria here, to the glory of God, my publishing company, we have 20 journals in that system, DOHED system. In Nigeria here, Covenant University that is highly ranked, one thing I noticed about them, any of their scholar that publishes in any of our 9 Scopus rated journals, the institution, if it is a journal that has article publication cost, APC, the institution pays for it. Landmark University does that. And recently, I think Babcock, you see a correlation between taking interest in research outputs of the lecturers in specific quality journals and the ranking. Is there anything you can do? What are your strategies for making sure that private universities, or the perception that private universities like Baze and the Nile, being very well structured, very nice facilities, still seem to be focusing too much on lectures and not so much on research? That
I'm
is a
happy that
perception.
I'm happy, Prof,
I'm
that
not
you
saying
said this. I'm happy, Prof, that you said this perception.
it's a
Um,
perception.
yeah, it's a perception, and so and sometimes perceptions can also be meaningful
Yeah,
because they might also necessitate a reaction. But I don't
yeah,
think this is largely true. And or you know
yeah,
me, Prof, you know that
yeah,
if you use me, for instance, and as an example, um, without being modest, I'm an editor of one of your publications. And in the last few years, I've been busy with research outputs. My latest book was released by Paul Grave Macmillan only in February. And I have another one under concentration by the University of Manchester. And yet another one is going to Palgrave, sometimes before the end of the year. So we are very, very busy. And I know quite a number of my colleagues are also busy with research publications in reputable journals, including in your own too, Prof. And what it is actually that sometimes we make some of these conclusions, not about you, for instance, general conclusions. And you were once in Baze as well, while you were
yeah,
still in Nasarawa. Quite a
yeah,
number of our professors are also from public universities, so the distinction sometimes may actually be non-existence between public and private university resources. Many of our lecturers are visiting professors from adjunct universities, visiting on sabbatical and all that. So it is something that is very fluid and difficult to disaggregate. But I see where you're coming from. Do not forget as well that private universities are not necessarily like public universities that get allocation, that get subvention. They are able to sustain themselves, maybe on proprietary funding, maybe through school fees, and maybe through some other kinds of help here and there that comes likely like the angels visits, few far between. So most of the time, some of them even struggle. At the time, I remember UC was even worried that some of them get licenses, they don't get students, they don't pay salaries 5, 6, 7 months. Quite a number of them like that. And this is rooted again in our political economy, and because of maybe a problem of miscalculation on how they projected where students would be coming from. And if some universities struggle with some of these stuff that I've mentioned, even salaries, even maintenance, the question of now focusing paying for research in hard currency will be challenging as well. And that's why you see these things happening. We do not want to go into the specifics of how some universities are rich, some private universities are richer than the other, but I can give you the example of my own, and you know too, that Baze University does not joke largely with staff welfare, because we pay premium, we pay higher. Well, if I oftentimes we say that we do not just pay take home, we do not just give people take home pay, we pay living wages, and it still continues what we still do. That's one. Then also the second one is that we do not joke with this payment. It comes as at when due, to the glory of God. And thirdly, people are often sponsored on research trips, research publications too. They are funded, like you said, fees. We assist lecturers to pay some of these fees demanded by publications, because, and I can say this authoritatively without being controverted, that our promotion system is one of the most rigorous around universities in Abuja. Our promotion system, because you have to meet all the required courts, and the professorial entry into the professorial rank is even all the more difficult. And we have seen people exited our school only because they were rightly denied, and to go and get it elsewhere. And this is something that speaks largely about how we want to continue to subscribe to quality, and I do not see us deviating from that. So we prioritize research. We do not joke with it. So many of our guys have gone on, to win awards. I may not have them offhand now, but I know they are out there, and which is why most of the time, quite a number of us can hold our head and say, yes, we are operating in a private university, but of course, irrespective of being private, we are also top notch, as the case could be, Prof.
Yeah, thank you. Prof, I know I promised you to, we agreed on 30 minutes. Will you have time for one question from the participants?
Yes,
I
yes,
saw
please.
Professor Tunda Denero. Cecilia?
Yes.
Hello, Cecilia, are you there? I don't know if you can access a comment. I think I saw a question from Professor Deniro. If you can, okay.
Yeah.
I
Yes, sir.
think it was.
Okay, there's a question.
There are two. Quickly, if you can read it to him so that others who don't know. There are a couple of questions, but if you can just take.
Let me read.
There's one from Professor Deniro and Professor Kenedo, if you don't mind.
Let me read them out. Yes, let me read them out.
Or if you can read the three, Prof can also tie all of them at some questions.
Sir. All right, sir. Okay, from Professor Tunde, talking about ethics.
Professor Deniro, not Tunde, is not here. Okay. Yes. Okay, that's all right. Okay.
Talking about ethics, how would the VC assist his colleague in solving the fraud in accreditation exercise to make them meaningful rather than fake in many cases?
Okay, one of the reasons I asked you to pick that in, as you know, Professor Deniro was a former Minister of Education. So, I mean, he has, ambassador to places, so he's also senator. Okay, and read the other so that our Prof will also take it into consideration.
All right. The second question from Golda, VC sir, what would you consider? Canada. What would you consider the greatest constraints for private universities in their efforts to be visible and improve their global ranking?
Okay, I think there's another one.
Yes.
Okay, that's all right. Allow him to.
Okay, sir.
All right, thank you very much, Prof. I actually saw the legendary Professor Tunde Adeniro in the audience, and I was quite slightly stage frightened, but I managed to get over it, So it's a pleasure to have him as one of those listening to us this morning. And of course, the legacy that people like this left is something I want to continue with. Legacy of publication, legacy of bringing up quality students, so that we can grow the system that we are finding ourselves for the good of tomorrow, as the case could be. So well done, Prof. And it's a pleasure having you around this morning. And on ethics, really, I agree with what the professor is talking about. It's something that is really, really very worrisome, Prof. And I often say, even in my public intervention, that the average Nigerian knows what the problem of Nigeria is. We all know what the problem is. But yeah, even so, no one is ready to be the solution. All we are comfortable with is to continue to be part of the problem. And we're not ready to be the solution. And if somebody comes out to say he or she wants to be the solution, that person is brought down, so to say, which is very, very unfortunate. There's a circle that we know that people have reported about, I've also read it in the media, that circle of, how do I put it now, inefficiency of unethical practices that takes place in the process of accreditation. And this is not just unfair to the student, but we're also being unfair to ourselves if this is actually true. And it's something that largely you do not want people who are educated in the manner in which you put lecturers and professors, to be part of these processes. But what we do, in what my proprietor does, from how I've seen it in the last 13 years, and of course, this is verifiable, is that anytime, we're up for accreditation, the relevant department is asked to produce everything that is needed, maybe 6-7 months before, and he makes sure he provides it to the best of his ability. And I can attest to this, on my honor. That's what we keep doing, just to be different, but because we do believe that we have obligation to our conscience, we have obligation to the students, stakeholders, including parents and guardians, and of course the general public, the public as the case could be. And what about the future of the Nigerian education system? These things have to be preserved, and of course, the step towards not preserving it begins when we begin to deviate from the norm, when we start to avoid doing the things that we should do ordinarily in the first instance. And of course, we are building something upon nothing. And that's what I do know that we try to, run away from, because we do know again that we're at the eye of the public. We are lucky that you already said, talking about, describe us as the two most visible private universities in Abuja area. We know this is a status that came not on a platter of gold, but because we try to be painstaking in all that we do. And if we have been doing that in the last 15 years, I do not see us moving away from that direction, Prof. And of course, on the question of great constraint of private universities, yes, it's just very, very obvious. We know that some of the best universities in the world are actually private universities. And there's no reason why we cannot replicate it in this country. Earlier on, you mentioned Covenant, and I think you mentioned Bangkok. Oftentimes, people also talk about Afeba Balola University, and sometimes people also talk about American University of Nigeria, where I was once a lecturer. And the thing we need to realize is that education is a service. Education is not like the selling products. It's not like a factory, sort of. And the service sector often often witness some level of disregard from authorities and from the system until they are able to show that they are completely above board, until they are able to demonstrate a very high level of credibility and integrity before regard comes in. Otherwise, there's no reason why private universities should not begin to be rated higher than even the oldest or the most reputable public university in Nigeria. We know that Covenant is often rated higher than Ibadan sometimes, but when you want to also come to the details, there are still some questions that you can ask. But do not forget, I mentioned it earlier, private universities are self-sustaining. And if you're not faith-based, where else are you going to get the money? To the banks. The banks will be charging interest. They're not going to say they're giving you credits without interest or anything. They're not going to give you preferential treatment. So how do you manage these resources? How do you bring about a balance? All these things come into place, and of course become some form of challenge for the private organizations. And so we have to put everything in context, Prof. And of course, at some point, we'll begin to understand our situation better.
Thank you very much, Prof. I don't want to be Oliver Twist, but if you permit, there is someone who has been raising the hand, and that will round up with that, Jato. If Jato is still wants to ask a question, will you be willing to take it in 1 minute?
Go ahead, Prof. Okay. I'm trapped already.
Okay.
I'm trapped.
Okay, so. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Prof.
Thank you. Good morning to you all. Thank you very much again, Prof. I'm actually one of your mentees in National State University. My name is Victoria Hawa Ibrahim Jato.
Okay.
I'm a lecturer from Nasarawa State University, and I'm happy to join you, Prof. Sir.
Thank you very much.
So to start with, mine is not a question, but just a comment to make, because this timely discussion on the future of higher education and AI era, we cannot run away from it. Our students are already meeting it head on. My son is just 13, and I gave him assignment recently. Before I knew it, he was done with the assignment with AI. So we cannot run away from it. And thank you very much for having this conversation. I was at the University of Oxford for about a month recently. And they are not condemning the use of AI. Instead, they are actively rethinking ethics, like what Prof. Sir had mentioned, developing clear guidelines, even for the University of Manchester, on responsible use and educating their lecturers, having workshops, educating their students on transparent use of AI. So their policies, especially for that of Oxford, emphasize more like a human approach, proper usage, but not a replacement for critical thinking. Now, the question is, how do we ensure critical thinking in our approach in teaching? Because AI comes in administration. I'm sure VC knows the use of AI comes in administration, in teaching, in learning, and in about 4 different aspects. So for me, I see that knowing that even secondary school students are exposed to it, if we ignore this reality, we risk producing graduates who either misuse the AI technology or fail to even compete globally. Yes, our strength as Nigerian university is having these resilient students, despite funding struggles. However, one major challenge that I worry about, I said I just want to make comment. I don't know if anybody is noticing it, but I really worry about, even in the prestigious private secondary schools that some of our kids go to, is the declining quality of secondary school education feeding into the system of higher education. So the problem of higher education, like Prof mentioned, I listened to him earlier. He said the higher education will always be there, looking at evolution of education from historical perspective. AI cannot take out the role of higher education, but one of the major challenges of higher education, particularly in Nigeria, is the declining quality of secondary school education. We saw it recently when the policymakers brought down JAM score. How this is fitting into the system. It seems like for me, many of my best students have graduated, and that affects us really, really well. So we shouldn't run away from that. I'm talking about higher, what do you call it earlier, the ranking thing. We can ask the questions why Oxford is so difficult to get in. Why Harvard is so difficult to get in. It's not like it's difficult. Why they actually go out to try to ensure that they sort out for the best brains. Where are these best brains coming from? Secondary school education. I'm thinking Ivy League, and I'm starting, and somebody is telling me at 13, you are late. For your son who is 13 years old, you are late in thinking Ivy League. So either private or public universities, if they are able to actually look at the entry procedures, but the entry procedures is an output of the secondary education quality. So this is a welcome discussion for all stakeholders and policymakers, Prof. It shouldn't just end here. It's NUC, private sector, private secondary schools, public secondary school need to come on ground and think about AI in education policy, and think about how to address funding infrastructure and digital divides. Africa is left behind. Yes, South Africa is always leading these days in the university ranking and all that. But we also have to rethink. We are gifted in this part of the world, but then we cannot just replace it with AI. It's very threatening. Our young ones are misusing it. So I don't want to take much of your time, but then this is where I end. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you for listening. That's all I have to say at the moment, Prof. Sir.
Yeah, thank you very much, my colleague.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Prof, Prof, just your last words and
yeah, I think she said a very wonderful contribution from Madam Jato. She actually said she only wanted to make a comment and not to ask a question, but it was a question in her comments. And I consider that question very, very, very important, and it's around how we can make our ability to think critically much more sophisticated in the wake of the onslaught of AI. And I agree with her largely with some of her submissions, especially with respect to how the changes being brought about by AI is becoming really frenetic. Some organizations in Western countries actually develop AI charter, AI policies, and they make sure that they review those charter, those policies every 6 months, sometimes every 3 months, because it keeps changing, and of course, if anything comes before them, they look at that document in relation to the updated charter. Otherwise, they will run into trouble. Because those societies are much more litigious than us. And of course, they want to run away from the problem of copyright infringement and all such things. So that's why I keep saying that it's a continuing thing. It's something that requires us to adapt quickly, adopt quickly, and propel ourselves to any next level, as quickly as possible, so that we'll not, be left behind. And I'm saying that being left behind is not just at the physical, infrastructural, or architectural level, but at the soft, intangible, intellectual aspect of it. Otherwise, we may not be where we actually want to be. And having said that, Prof, I think I've enjoyed the discussion. It's something that will continue to, that is a conversation that is endless, but it's a conversation that should always be meaningful so that it can be rewarded, especially in a fast-changing world, as the case could be. Thank you, Prof.
Yeah, thank you very, very much. And I thank you for making out your time to come. And thanks to all the participants. It's a little bit early because Prof has, when you become a vice chancellor, I was asking him the other time how you juggle managerial responsibilities, several meetings we're trying to write, which is a lonely thing. Thank you very much again, Prof. It's much appreciated.
Thank you,
Thanks all to all that came around, in spite of the
and
time.
I should say that this is the very first interview I'm going to grant since I was appointed.
Yeah.
And it says how important you are to me. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. We've come a long way. Thank you very much. Yeah,
thank you.
And that's where we call it a day today. Thank you very much for all that participated. Thank you very much.
Thank you.